Well, not yet.
Oh, nope.
That's more for our closed captioning piece, just so you know.
I'm on mute. No, actually I'm not.
Okay. There's Lisa.
Is that the one underneath everything else? There we go.
Okay, we can start anytime you would like to, Marie.
I think we can start now. And you know what, Deb, I don't have my script with me, so please help me along. But I guess we take roll call first.
There you go. Do you want me to take that or do you want to go?
Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay. 1 second, let me bring up my cheat sheet. Okay. We have Marie Bender.
Here.
Tom Hildebrandt. Tom, you're on mute.
Here.
Thank you. Craig Olson.
Here.
Lisa Anderall.
Here.
Carol Berseth.
Here.
Hillary Ete.
Here.
Did I do that right? Good. And Geraldine Poor.
Here.
All right, thank you, everyone. And I'm gonna slip into the background and let you guys do your thing.
So Deb, do we have anybody for public appearances?
Nobody recorded a request with me.
Okay, so we can skip all that.
Yes.
And then I guess we can just start with the agenda, which would be a Len with staff introductions, I believe.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and introduce staff that are here. I am really excited this evening to be able to introduce you to two new staff members, at least to the parks portion of the city of Mercer Island. So the first one I'm going to introduce is Sam Harb, and I gave you guys a little bit of an introduction at the last meeting, though he wasn't present. So Sam is our new parks operations manager, and by new, I mean not very new at all. He's actually been in the position for about 4 months now, and he's been with the city since, I think it's 2015, right, Sam? And he's worked in various parts of public works, customer response, and utilities. So I'll let him say his introduction to himself.
Yeah, my name's Sam. I've been with the city a little over 6 years now, and in parks for, like Elaine said, 4 months or so. And while at this point I've been a little bit more focused on parks maintenance, I've been getting caught up to speed on Pioneer Park and the trails and the open spaces and all the forests of the island. So I hope to meet you all in the field at some point.
And then another introduction that I want to make is our new natural resources project manager. That's Lizzie Stone. And Lizzie has just started with us just about, what, 3 weeks ago, something like that. So at the end of June. And she is busy getting caught up to speed on just absolutely tons of stuff. And she brings with her a lot of background in various natural resources. So take it away, Lizzie.
Hi, yeah, my name is Lizzie. I am very new in this role, but I'm really excited to be learning about all of the incredible work that I've been seeing that's been done in Mercer Island's forested parks. And I'm excited to be meeting members of the community that are so dedicated to their parks and to this work. So as Elaine mentioned, I come from a background I worked at a few different nonprofits in restoration and habitat building fields. I worked with King County for a bit and recently got my master's in forest ecology at UW. So I'm really excited to be here managing the restoration side of Mercer Island's open spaces.
Great, thank you, Lizzie. And then I would be remiss not to mention that we have Andy Prince on with us tonight, which is a special treat for the Open Space Conservancy Trust Board. You all don't get to see Andy quite often enough for the amount of work that he does in Pioneer Park. And Andy's on tonight. He's going to be doing the trails work plan for this year. So you'll get to hear from him later. So welcome to all the staff tonight. All right, and I think that's it, Marie. We can move on to elections.
Okay, well, thank you and welcome to everybody who's new, and thank you everybody else for, I mean, the really wonderful work everybody does. It's, I think everybody is really impressed with our Parks and Rec staff, and it's great to have everyone. So, election of officers, because we've had 0 in-person meetings for more than a year, I took it upon myself to talk to everyone in little separate conversations to try to figure out who had an inclination and felt they could at this time take on one of the roles as officers. So I think I'm going to do what is maybe not necessarily typical, but I will put in nominations and ask people to second the motions, if that works for everybody. I guess so I'm not sure what order we're supposed to do it, so let's just start at the chair. And I would like to nominate Tom Hildebrandt for that position.
I'd second that.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Jerry?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, so Tom will be our next chairperson. And for vice chair, I talked to Carol and she was willing to take on those responsibilities. So I would like to nominate Carolyn Berseth to be vice chair for the coming year. Do I have a second?
I'd like to second that.
Thank you, Jerry. Everyone in favor, say aye, please. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Hillary and Carolyn, I didn't see your lights blink.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you very much. I'm counting based on how many yellow lights I see.
Okay.
That was unanimous. And then for secretary, Jerry, who has in the past served many years in a lot of different capacities, including chairperson, has agreed to become secretary again. So I would like to nominate Geraldine Poor to be the secretary for the coming year.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Everybody, aye? Aye?
Aye.
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 Marie, just
Yeah.
real quick, repeat for me who seconded the motion, please.
Berseth.
Thank you.
Carolyn. Yeah,
Thank you.
and it's unanimous. And I think then the protocol is I turn the meeting over to Tom.
Ah.
Is that correct?
Yes,
correct.
Okay, well, thank you for the opportunity to be your chairperson for the last 2 years. It's been unusual.
Yes, thank
But in
you.
many ways, I've gotten to know people on a different level than I would have otherwise. So thank you.
Yes, thank you for your service.
And
And
thank
so-
you, Mary. You've been marvelous.
It's
Yes.
been fun.
All right, next item on the agenda would be approval of the minutes, but I noticed in the packet that was sent out that the minutes were unavailable and they have not been transcribed yet. So we'll simply push that item off to our next meeting and hopefully then the meetings will be available by then. So we'll have 2 sets of meetings to approve. So without further ado, we'll move on to the Trails work plan and turn over the floor to Andrew to tell us what's happening with the Trails work plan thus far.
Excellent, thank you, Tom. I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see the PowerPoint? Great.
Yes.
Well, yeah, so this is the Trails work plan for 2021. And I'd like to just walk you through some action items that we have planned for the trails in Pioneer Park and Ingstrom Open Space this year. It is a little bit of an unusual year for us because, you know, we're still coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. Typically in this presentation, I'd summarize the work that happened in the previous year just to kind of remind everyone where we're at with our work plan and what we've accomplished. In 2020, there's not much to summarize, unfortunately. We had no seasonal staff that we hired for our parks open space program. We did no major projects in Pioneer Park and Ingstrom. The stay home, stay healthy order affected our full-time staff. So we're doing the bare minimum in Pioneer Park and Ingstrom, and that was basically just keeping trails brushed and open, accessible. And even that took us a while to get up to the standards we like to keep. So summary of 2020 work is a little underwhelming, but that's the year we had. It is worth noting, I think, the winter storm event, January 12 and 13, we had quite a lot of blowdown in all of our parks, but specifically Pioneer Park and Ingstrom suffered from this event. There was approximately 23 obstructions over trails. It took, 32 obstructions over trails, about 23 hours of labor to clean it up. And if you were around for that event, you might remember the wind gusted up to 70 miles per hour in places. So this was a big lift, and it took quite a lot of effort to get our trails open. So I think it's worth noting, especially in that we lost some really large trees in this event, which is a shame to see. But that's part of the process of owning a forest on the island. So now on to the work plan for 2021, what we're actually doing this year. And because this meeting is happening about halfway through our summer season, when our seasonals, you know, we have them on and we get the majority of our work done. Some of this work is already been accomplished or is ongoing, including this piece of work here, Beet Hazelnut pruning. This is something that we typically undertake as part of our normal brushing routine, but since we had so little help last year to do our brushing, we're doing a big focus on pruning Beet Hazelnut this year. It's a spreading shrub that we have in a lot of parts of Pioneer Park, and it tends to, when it gains mass, lay down over the trailways. So we're doing a big push to prune these back and reclaim some of the width on our trails. And this work is currently underway. I do have an update on root intrusions in the Northwest Quadrant. This was an issue that we were covering in 2019, I believe. So it may feel pretty distant, but just to remind you, we've had some complaints about root intrusions in the perimeter trails of Northwest Quadrant. And this group had asked for some solutions, and I'm here to report what we've done about this issue. Wherever there were intrusions attached to dead trees or stumps, we used a stump grinder to take those down below the trail grade. And then big portions of this perimeter trail were gravelled over in 2018 and 19 as resurfacing, our sort of planned resurfacing of these trails. So some of them were covered by that. And then we found our best management for roots attached to live trees is to keep them painted with white marking paint so they're highly visible. So we spray those about quarterly. Another piece of work that we would like to accomplish this year is some rehab on the Ravine Trail in the northwest quadrant, or northeast, excuse me, quadrant of Pioneer Park, where it attaches to Engstrom open space. So this trail is, it's a very steep side slope that this trail is on, which creates quite a bit of maintenance issues. It wants to erode. It's just the nature of gravity and steep slopes like this. So we'd like to add some additional curb to it. These wooden peeler poles that you see in the photo on the right and line much of this trail. We'd like to add some more of those in, as well as some light retreading and regrading, digging into the trail and bringing in some gravel and soil perhaps to fill holes and slumps. So that could be a substantial project for us. I think the biggest project that has happened already in Pioneer Park is the Southeast Perimeter Trail. If you see the map, the yellow highlighted areas have been resurfaced, and this was the first major project we did with our seasonal staff this year. I feel it went pretty well. This trail was pretty dished out, eroded, and was starting to hold water and organic material, getting really pretty muddy through the winter. So we rented some small machinery, scraped the inorganic soils off until we revealed the original graveling of the trail, and then built that back up into a nice thick crown with 5/8 inch gravel and quarter minus gravel. We shaped it so it'll continue to shed water and organic material in the future, and compacted it with vibratory compactors. So this was a big lift. I think it was, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I think it was over 200 tons of rock we put down on here. So hopefully this will stand up and not need much maintenance going forward. So that's my report on what we've been up to trails-wise in Pioneer Park. I'd be happy to answer any questions or hear any comments.
Well, I got a comment and a question. First of all, having been in the parks right after the January event and more recently, your group has just done extraordinary work. I mean, I think that what happened, between the absence of folks because of the COVID shutdown and the event in January, boy, there's been some major challenges that have been presented to the park quadrants. So I will absolutely say, hats off. Your group, despite being short-staffed, have been very attentive, and it's their work is very obvious to those of us who have sort of watched this evolve. So the question is, how long will the seasonal folks be available to you in terms of accomplishing what you set out to do for this year?
Sure. Well, thank you. That's nice to hear, Carolyn. And we hire this year 3 seasonals for 6 months, so they'll run to the end of September. So we're a little over halfway through there.
Yeah. And I would agree with your assessment. There's quite a bit of erosion. I'm in the northeast quadrant, and it's very obvious there. And I think that all I can say is kudos for what you've accomplished, but acknowledge that there's still more work to be done.
Yep, thank you for that. And thank you for your report. Are there any other comments or questions? Okay, then I guess we can go on to the next agenda item. So we have an update on the restoration contracting work that's being done in the Pioneer Parks.
There we go. Okay, so yeah, so last time that we met, which was in March, Kim gave a pretty thorough presentation, which was the restoration work plan for 2021. And I thought it was probably a good time to give you an update on that work plan because things have changed a little bit since then. It's been an eventful 4 months. And the biggest thing that I want to report on is that work, that body of work that Kim presented was put out for bid with all of the other restoration contracting in all of the open spaces and parks. And as I believe Kim explained, we award our restoration contracts on a park by park basis. And part of that is because the body of work that we have across all of our open spaces is really too large for any one contractor. It's just so much acreage and we're trying to get so much done that very few companies actually have the bandwidth to do that. And it's worked out really well for us that we award on a per park basis. We get a lot of different contractors and it works out for them as well. Unfortunately, what we found in this bidding round was that the body of work that was put out for Pioneer Park was essentially too large. So there were a fair amount, and I'll go through this in more detail, but there were a fair amount of comprehensive invasive removal projects that were included in that bid packet. And if you'll recall, comprehensive invasive removal is it's sort of the new phase we're moving into in the forest health plan. And this is really when we start to go after all the invasives that are on the ground level. So when you think of that, it's usually things like English ivy that's creeping on the ground, blackberry thickets, things like that. This is usually a pretty heavy lift in the first year, and we know that this is a pretty expensive task per square foot, which is kind of how we break down these units. What we found was that, like I said, because we had so many comprehensive invasive removal projects in that original bid, it came out being just too much. It exceeded the budget that we had for restoration. So we ended up not awarding that work. And basically what we've decided to do instead is we've decided to piece the work out into across separate contractors. There's a lot of work in Pioneer still. And I'm gonna kind of walk through Kim's restoration work plan and talk about what we are and what we're not doing or where we're shifting time schedules, just so you know, because you may have noticed there haven't been any contractors in the park yet this year, which is rather odd for getting to mid-July without any contractors. So I am going to share my screen with you. Okay, so oh, sorry, there we go. So hopefully you can all see that. So I just took Kim's restoration work plan and I put some markup on it so that we'll just kind of walk through it. So quadrant by quadrant, we're looking at the northwest quadrant here, and the contractor work that she had listed here was some ivy rings in this blue middle section. We expect those to be done just a little bit later than we would normally do them, but this is not a time-sensitive task, and so we're completely fine with this getting just pushed back a tiny bit. The invasive removal maintenance in this purple section here, which is just really kind of a lighter touch to make sure that those areas aren't slipping back and getting a lot of invasive growth. So this is really more of a fine-tuning type of work. And then the watering of a couple of planting sites, plantings that went in last fall. These are both being watered by our in-house crew right now. They do a fair amount of watering with a large water trailer. I believe it's a 500-gallon water trailer. And so they have a little difficulty getting into this, this other one. So we're working on logistics there. But So that's the current status of the northwest quadrant. In the northeast quadrant, everything is expected to happen this year in this quadrant. One of them is a fall planting that's supposed to happen as usual in the fall, October through December. This area, I believe, is getting about 500 new plants in it. And then we have some invasive tree treatment up just north of the creek in the northwest quadrant, or the northeast quadrant here. And that's expected to happen in a time that will be very effective for controlling things like English holly, laurel, and other tree species. Probably the area that's affected most by some of these delays, and like I said, scaling back our work for the comprehensive invasive removal, is the southeast quadrant. And if you remember, this is really where each of those new sort of waves of restoration tasks begin in the forest health plan. So what we've decided to do is to remove this sort of bluish green section here, the PP 1001. We're going to take that completely out and look at bidding that next spring. We'll be bidding a lot earlier next spring, so that should be good. We tend to get better prices. PP 0902B, which is this orange section here, this may be delayed. And again, this is really going to depend on sort of contractor availability. This time of year, we do have some issues with availability, but we are really hoping to chip away at this. It is a very large portion of the southeast quadrant and would have a really good visual impact in that section of the park. I think the areas that we're not really willing to compromise on comprehensive invasive removal, because they are such important areas, are this pink area at the very top. So this is the area right near the intersection of 68th and Island Crestway. And then this smaller little blue section down in the southwest corner here. If you've been out to this section, you've probably seen it is really covered in blackberry, and it would be just a great thing to do. There's been some invasive removal just to the east of it, and so it would provide a really nice continuous area of healthy forest. So we're very committed to getting those done this year. And those just get shifted back a tiny bit. Just between August and October, the contractors are able to do that work. So I wouldn't say there's huge issues here or big changes, but I do want to just let you know, because there is a change from the work plan that was put out in front of you in March. And then lastly, just to make sure that you're all aware, Angstrom is actually bid out separately because it's technically a separate park, and that was actually awarded. In fact, the Ivy Ring creation, if you've been out there, you will see that I believe it's complete, and if it's not complete, it is probably almost done. I think it still needs to be inspected. And then we have invasive removal maintenance coming up also. So that work wasn't affected by these delays at all. So this is on task. And I think that's it for me. I am happy to take questions about it, though, if there are any.
I have a question. So how much of this was actually taken over by in-house that we thought was going to be contractors?
Almost none. I mean, really, it's just the watering. Yeah. The things that were already slated for our in-house crew, I believe, are still on the work plan. And Lizzie may be able to speak to that, but I'm not going to put her on the spot at this meeting because she's still getting her feet under her. But yes, Kim left a pretty robust list of projects for our seasonal crew. And I know, a couple of the things that were on there were things like some planting maintenance and some knotweed monitoring in the southeast quadrant, some very large areas. So those will continue to get attention. But in terms of volume of work, not a lot was added beyond just the watering specifications.
So are we spending up to our limit that was budgeted?
So it's one thing to remember, and we haven't really done a sort of a budget overview in a while on kind of how we do this, but this all of this work is funded out of our capital improvement projects. So this is actually budgeted on a 2-year cycle. And so what's really nice about that is that those funds are fungible, right? If we go heavy in the first year of the biennium, we go a little bit lighter in the second year, but there's no problem about not being able to receive carryover into that second year. So that allows us a little more flexibility. However, when those bids came in March, it became pretty clear to both Kim and I that it was just too much. We weren't willing to really throw that much money at this so early on in the biennium, because it does start to tie our hands a little bit in terms of what other work we can get done. We can't be quite as nimble in responding to issues that come up. So we decided to just push it off for a year, and that we both felt very comfortable with that.
Okay, Jerry has her hand up and her mute on.
Hi, thanks. My question is that I know in past years you've used Earth Core to do a lot of work, and I wondered if this kind of work would frequently be done by Earth Core, and if that's shifted because of pandemic, or if you could speak to the role of Earth Core and this.
Actually, it's a great question, Jerry, because I'll try not to get too down in the weeds, pun totally intended. So I think what you're referring to when you bring up Earth Core is their volunteer management. Is that correct? Okay, so I'll speak to that. I will also say that Earth Core has in the past, they do have restoration crews, and they have bid on work in the past. So, but they're sort of two different sides of the house. Earth Core has traditionally been our volunteer manager, yet we tend to have certain parks that are assigned to different volunteer management groups. So Mountains to Sound Greenway may get some, suite of parks, and Earth Core gets others. Earth Core has been in Pioneer Park since before I started with the city 13 years ago. Unfortunately, because of COVID, they really did have to halt almost all of their volunteer events. I recall that Kim didn't give you an update about some small events that were happening in Pioneer Park at the end of last year. They were limited to 5 people each. One of them was our Arbor Day planting, which is one of those watering sites that you saw on the map. Since then, Earth Core has really stepped back and is really reevaluating how they want to structure their volunteer management, in addition to the fact that they lost a lot of staff as a result of the pandemic. So actually, Lizzie and I had a conversation with them today about how they're looking at bringing back volunteer events. And so we're really still at the nascent phase of that. We had expected them really to be bringing them back on board in the middle of the summer this year. But it sounds like they're going to push back and possibly at least try and get a few events going this fall. So, we would really like that, obviously, because we want to keep people engaged, and it is a really big lift having these events, and they are very well equipped for it. But we understand that they're looking at their own business model and what makes sense for them. So we're waiting patiently to find out when we can start ramping that back up.
So if I can just follow on with a brief question of the work that you described in the plan that you just updated. Would this typically be done by them also, or is this separate typically contracted work?
Yeah, so we typically separate out what's contracted from what is volunteer managed, and that's for a number of different reasons. But it's also a financial consideration, right? We want the contractors doing one suite of work. No, they have delineated areas within the park that are really their own, and they tend to work around the perimeter of the northwest quadrant. In recent years, they've been working a lot along the west side, but in years past, they've worked along the south edge between the 2 trails. They've worked on the east edge. So, and they continue to steward those areas. So we've lost a little bit of ground in some of those places, but I imagine that we'll be able to get back in there and, you know, clear around those plantings. So, you know, if they aren't coming back online quite as soon as we need, we may be looking at doing a little bit of a touch with contractors on those areas, just so they don't slip too far next, you know, early next spring, something like that. Because we want to make sure that they're still being kept up.
Okay. Any other questions for Elaine? Okay, then I guess we'll move on to the issue that I brought up several meetings ago. I noticed that there's some erosion within the park due to people along 84th Avenue Southeast driving up over the curb, and then this destroys the vegetation and tends to create muddy spots. And I hear that how this has been addressed in the past is to bring in gravel to fill in the muddy spots, but then that looks like a pad for people to drive completely off the roadway and park inside the park. And I think that for the sake of conservation, we need to kind of delineate where the parking areas should be and try to encourage people to at least park 50% on the roadway. So my proposal for this would be to use down trees and brush and just general maintenance to gently delineate that space. And if there were large logs that could be moved into position, perhaps far enough back from the curb that people could still walk between the log and the roadway, then that would be a good way to handle it. So partly I wanted to make this proposal and partly open up the discussion in general to this group to see if there are suggestions that we can come up with and a way of dealing with the problem.
Can I interject just a tiny bit, Tom? So I did pull together a presentation on this because I thought that everyone should be on the same page. So I don't know if you want to do that before the discussion, just so everyone knows. I have pictures of the areas that you're referencing.
Oh, sure. That would be excellent.
Okay.
So,
and I know Lisa has her hand raised too, so.
Yep. Did you have a question?
Oh, well, my hand can probably wait, but I didn't know how many people had been tracking on Nextdoor, and I honestly don't even remember what part. I think it was Pioneer Park. There was this complaint by a citizen that said, our park now looks like a compost dump because people are the park's maintenance, and I think they said, the right-of-way people or the whatever are just taking down trees and limbs and just leaving them on the side of the park. And maybe they'll deteriorate eventually, but in the meantime, it looks awful. So I don't know if anybody saw that post. I was looking for it. I can't find it, but I just thought I'd throw that out there as like one piece of community sentiment as we think about this. If this is going to be successful, I think it's going to be an education process for people to appreciate the value of what this type of barrier adds, and maybe they can kind of be able to find it beautiful at some point.
Yeah, that's good to point out. So I'll take a look and see if I can find that post. And
yeah, I'll look again too. I just couldn't find it.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know about. So Elaine, you had your presentation ready?
I do, yeah. Bring that up. All right, hopefully you're all able to see that all right?
Yep.
Yeah, so, I know, Tom, that you had brought this up before. This was actually an item that the trust board put on the work plan for 2020 because we didn't deal with almost any of the items on the 2020 work plan. It was carried over onto the work plan for 2021. And really, I will say about a topic like this, it is a big topic, and that this is really the first touch on it. So it may take, multiple conversations about different facets of it to really figure out how you want to move forward. And so I just say that as, this may not be a one and done conversation, but maybe it is. It's really up to you all. So the impetus for all of this was an interest in eliminating the gravel parking areas that are along 84th and moving to an on-street parking model. I will note that parking is addressed in the Pioneer Park Master Plan. So there are specific areas that are noted for gravel parking within the master plan. So I think just a note that if there is an interest in changing one that is in the master plan, it may behoove the trust to actually make a formal amendment to the master plan just to reflect the change. And then I also want to note, just because I think it's an important consideration when we're talking about this road, we all think of it as a very, very wide road. But just to note that this is identified as one of Mercer Island's primary bike routes, the north-south bike route. So while it is quite wide and it has sharrows on it, it is considered a primary bike route. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page about what we're looking at here, we are in the northwest quadrant and looking at that western edge. This is the 6500 to 6700 block of 84th. It's a pretty long block. And then if we zoom in a little bit on that area, I'll just point out, so we have the north pullout, which is the one near the roundabout at the very end where we have that fence that was built by the Boy Scout. We have the central pullout, which is at the trailhead and the intersection. And then the south pullout that is right next to the intersection with 68th. In between, we have a fair amount of on-street parking, and I will talk about these areas, Tom, where you have seen sort of rogue parking, I guess we can say. So I'll go through each of them. There's a couple pictures of each that I took somewhat recently. So the north pullout is the only one that is actually, the only one of these three that is really actually denoted in the master plan as a gravel parking area. So this one is about 165 to 170 feet long. It's, I believe, the longest one of all of our gravel pullout areas. This is maybe one of the most well used in the park. It is a major trailhead, I know, for dog walkers. And it seems that there's ample room along there. I'll also note that this is the one where we have the fence, but even before the fence was put in, there are these logs that were, they're sort of those peeler pole curbs that Andy was talking about for the trails that were sort of countersunk into the soil many, many years ago. So, and those have, even before the fence went up, those were actually a really good way to delineate that we didn't want people parking beyond them, and people seemed to respect them pretty well. It was the walkers and the dogs that didn't respect them as well, and that's why the fence ended up going up. So just to note that. I think the other thing worth noting here, if the trust were to consider, making this smaller or eliminating it, is that this is the area, this is the one area of 84th along this section where the road actually narrows down a bit. And that's because it's channelizing a little bit into that roundabout, that traffic circle that's at the north end. So it really does get quite narrow there. And so having the parking off the road helps alleviate, any interference with traffic on that end. It does seem that this, and at least in my tenure here, it does seem that this gravel area is moving south. It is expanding to the south a bit. And maybe that's because, people have parked there and therefore there was mud and then gravel was added. That may be the way that this has been happening. But I really did try to differentiate between what areas are gravelled and what areas are just bare soil. The central pullout, which is at the intersection with Southeast 66th Street, also is at the trailhead for the Hazelnut Trail. And, you know, this one's moderately active. I think it helps that there's a garbage can right at the pullout. And dog walkers seem to like that. It makes it really easy. There really is no delineation around this parking area whatsoever, no curbing, no fences. And this one really has, you know, sort of ebbed and flowed over the years with the use. It is extending significantly to the south. And this is really the one where we start to see it moving, you know, sort of these desired areas moving south. This one isn't identified in the Pioneer Park Master Plan at all. It's just defined as a trailhead exclusively. The south pullout is really like immediately adjacent to that intersection with 68th. It's about 128 feet long, so it's actually the shortest one. Interestingly, it is identified in the master plan only as being a ADA parking stall or a handicap parking stall. So that's really the only parking that is denoted in the master plan for this area of the park, but it is specifically called out. It's very, as I said, it's very close to that intersection with 68th. So if there was a consideration for moving this to on-street parking, there would have to be a southern limit to that because you don't want people parking on the street so close to that intersection. And then a little bit tongue-in-cheek, I wrote there are many styles of parking in this area. This is probably where we see the most interpretation of parking. As you can see here, we've got some people parked exclusively on the street. We've got one person kind of parked at an angle with two wheels up. And then some people park all the way up on the top. And there's usually a combination of all three when you go out there. It seems that everyone has sort of a different way of parking in this area. It is getting wider over the years. And, you know, there's really just grass adjacent to it, which I think makes it a little easier for people to push the boundary of this a little bit more. This one, in my mind, doesn't seem to get quite as muddy as some of the other ones, maybe because it's so exposed, and maybe the water can sheet off to the east on this one. The areas where we see this other off-street parking or this rogue parking is really between the central and the south pullout. And there's a fair amount of it in there. There's a lot of bare dirt. I will say that what I see is a lot of contractors that eat their lunch along here. And I think it's probably because it's shady and it's a little out of the way. And it may be not clear that they're okay to just park on the street. I think probably my biggest concern with this when I see it is yes, there is restoration that's happening right up to that edge. We have shrubs that are planted right up to that edge, and those have been pushed back a little bit by this parking, pruned by cars. But I think probably the larger issue is things like this tree that you see in the picture on the right, is that they're parking directly at the base of that tree, which is causing some pretty severe soil compaction. And I think as we look at establishing trees along this edge, you know, that's something to be taken into consideration in general, how you want to mitigate that, or if you want to actually put in a barrier in specific areas to keep people from moving onto them. So that's, yeah, I have a sort of a lot of different ways we could go with this discussion, and Tom, I'll let you kind of take it from here, but I think there are a lot of questions about sort of how much the trust wants to pursue this, and you know, sort of what level of priority this would be in light of other issues in the park. But then also looking at what would the decommissioning of these areas look like? I mean, we can speak to what the process looks like, but I think the trust probably would need to speak to what goes in its place, right? And in terms of the aesthetics of a preventative structure to keep people out of it, or replanting and visibility at the trailheads and things like that. So I think there's a lot of different lot of things to discuss in this subject. And that's it for me, Tom.
Yes, well, I kind of opened the discussion, but I'd like to hear from other members of the board if this is something that's a matter of concern or whether I'm just creating to do. Yes, Marie.
So, you know, I agree that we've got a parking problem on 84th, but I think we have to kind of look at it in terms of the entire park. So, I mean, the other places for people, so for the Northwest Quadrant, that's the only logical place to park. The other parking areas you might park at is in the Southeast, which has limited parking along East Mercer Way and 68th, I guess, which have been maintained as parking spaces by the city. In fact, did a ton of work this past couple of months. And then the parking for the Northeast Quadrant is way on the east side, a long ways from the Northwest. So the reality is, if you're gonna be in the Northwest Quadrant, which is, I believe, the most used quadrant, 84th is where you pretty much have to park unless you go over to queue at, you know, the parking lot, which you're probably not supposed to be doing. So, I mean, I guess so I think the parking has to be maintained. And if it weren't for the fact that that's a bike route, I probably would say maybe there's a halfway measured, but I think for the safety of the bikers, I don't think a half a car width makes a whole lot of difference to the park as long as we do it correctly. I do not like the fact that contractors park there, and sometimes I see cars parked there overnight and several days at a time, and they're clearly contractor sort of associated vehicles. So I'm wondering if there's a way to, I mean, I really would expand it, because I think people are going to continue driving over the curb no matter what. It's not a big enough, it's you know, it's a curve. It's not a straight up and down kind of curb. It's very easy to drive over and into the parking area. And I take Elaine's comment about that middle section where there are established trees that I would go out of my way to protect. And if that means, you know, new planting to make it impossible to park there, I would say, let's try to do something like that. But for the rest of it, I really would encourage us to suggest that we put in gravel that's the width of a car, allow parking, because all three of those entrances get used a lot, and all three of them have parking all the time. And I think we have to allow people a place to park their cars, because I would say, I don't know, maybe half the parking is people who bring their dogs. And I wouldn't want to encourage people to park over at QFC and put their dogs on a leash and bring over to, I think it just encourages too much interaction with traffic. So I guess my bottom line is, I would say create full-time parking, clearly delineate with logs the edge to keep people from encroaching further into the park. And then for that section where we don't want people parking because of existing trees, do something to make it clear that you can't park there. I also, maybe we should put up signs that says this is for park use only, to just put those contractors on notice that this is not a lunch place. So that's my 3 cents.
So I want to make one clarification, just in case I wasn't clear about it. So I did have a conversation with the city's traffic engineer about this road because I was interested in the width and if there were limitations on the on-street parking there, in terms of, you know, if the trust was to recommend that we go to all on-street parking, possibly with the exception of the north end. And she did, you know, she did look at it and she said, no, on-street parking would be fine in terms of both the traffic flow and the fact that it's a bike route. So she did not have concerns specifically about on-street parking there. And that's a full car width parking, right? So not halfway up on the curb, but entirely in the road. Like I said, the only section that she really brought up was that very south end, because we don't want people parking on the road that close. So we would need to figure out what that distance needs to be. She would do that. And then we would have put a sign, no parking south of here, you know, something like that. So, or here to corner, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's good to know. I think I'm still more inclined to create real parking because I don't think people are going to stop driving over the curb unless we put up a barrier that was right at the edge of the park and made it impossible to park.
Yes, for context, I know that a standard freeway lane is 14 feet wide, and I didn't get out and measure the width of 84th Avenue, but it's probably pretty close to 50 feet wide paved surface, which means that there's sufficiency for 4 freeway lanes.
It's actually between 34 and 35 feet wide.
34, okay. A minimal traffic lane for a city street is 11 feet wide. So, so if it's 33 feet wide, that would be sufficient for parking on one side and 2 lanes of traffic if it were signed that way. One thing that I've noticed is that at the intersection or for the middle trailhead, there's a fire plug that's sort of at the north side of that. And if I remember the laws correctly, you're not allowed to park within 15 feet of a fire plug or 30 feet of an intersection. So that means that you really can't park on the street anywhere close to that middle trailhead. So that would be something that would argue in favor of having delineated off-street parking right there, where using logs as barriers could prevent people from parking too close to the fire plug. Just a suggestion there. And I kind of like the idea of having a well-defined parking area marked with gravel and bounded in some way so that it's clear that there's a limit, so we don't have this continuous creeping erosion of the area inside the park. I guess my main concern is that it looks like things are getting gradually, or the parking area is getting gradually larger over time. If it is just bounded in some way, I'd be more comfortable with the situation.
I will say, you know, I spoke to the fact that those buried, you know, peeler poles or whatever they are, they're a little bit larger. That they seem to have worked pretty well in the northwest quadrant. Like I said, before that fence was put in. The other place that I'm thinking that they have been placed, and maybe Andy has an interpretation of this also, but in the small parking area that is in the northeast quadrant along the south edge, but in the middle, so where there's a bench, I believe that's also delineated by the same type of log, and it has worked pretty well. They don't last forever. They do need to be replaced, and you really need to put them in the place you want them. But I believe those have worked pretty well about keeping that from creeping too much. They may have been placed a little wider than I would have done them, but they seem to have given people enough of a visual cue that that's the boundary for parking.
So just one question I have is, you know, what is the chance that the Boy Scouts would be interested in erecting some additional fences? Just because I think it's a nice natural way to delineate, you know, where the boundary is. That seems to have been very effective, both visually and physically in the one place where it has been erected. My concern is that, people are going to park, they're not thinking often about, ecology. They're looking to walk the dog or to take their kids or an elderly relative walking. So I think we have to be pragmatic. And I think, being very clear about, yes, we're willing to, enlarge the parking area, define where it is, but then I think we do have to be very firm about, what the boundary is to that, because people being people, they will continue to encroach on this if they can.
I think that's a good point. And if you don't mind, Tom, I'd love to provide a little bit of info on that. So there's one thing to remember along here that I should have put in the slideshow, but I didn't, which is that the actual boundary of Pioneer Park is set back from the road edge. So there is a right of way, and I'm measuring it as we speak. It looks like it's, oh boy, sorry about that. Looks like it's about 10 feet off of the road edge is technically right of way. Now, right now, the city doesn't have any designs on that right of way necessarily, but it does give me pause when we talk about, if we were to talk about something like putting a fence, along the roadway because of that right of way, right? If a fence were to be erected, it probably would need to be at the boundary of the park instead of in the middle of the right of way. So just note.
Well, that sounds to me like just about the right place to put a fence if we put parking there. Right?
That's because people will park far enough away from the fence that they can open their doors.
Yeah. So that's probably a good thing from this perspective anyway.
I'll chime in just to say I appreciate the discussion, and it seems like we often end up asking staff to piece together what we said and come back with some proposals. So I don't know if that's where we're headed on this one, but I was very intrigued to hear you say, Elaine, that other staff felt it was appropriate to have on-street parking with the bike sharrows there. Did I hear that correctly?
That was my conversation with the transportation engineer, is that she would say that this, by definition, that, we're not prevented from doing on-street parking on that entire block. So
on the pavement of the block.
Right, on the actual pavement. So if the decision from the trust board was to actually go ahead and decommission those gravel pullouts, there would be adequate on-street parking there, for the volume that we currently have parking along that street.
And then I will just say I would worry about signing a park for who could be there and who couldn't be there. So I would be nervous about that. And it's also interesting that this 10 feet of right-of-way issue comes up here.
Yes. Did you have a comment, Hillary?
I do. To go ahead and follow up on what Elaine was saying about the 10 feet right away and where the park boundary delineation is. Elaine, just being part of the larger public works network, is there a budgetary incentive for other departments to want to go ahead and erect boundaries or structures like bollards, for example, that would kind of keep the cars closer into the road and off of that right of way to facilitate things like stormwater infiltration, or things that wouldn't necessarily have to be done by the Parks Department or Natural Resources, but could be creatively approached by other departments as a win-win benefit for more stakeholders?
It's an interesting question, and one that I could certainly pursue. So far, I haven't seen that. You know, Pioneer Park being what it is and having so little infrastructure in it, I think those are good considerations as they pertain to the park, though, particularly things like infiltration, right? I mean, I'll spend just a second on a soapbox about this, but you know, one of the things that we talk about in terms of the habitat value of Pioneer Park is that it is a lot of edge. And in terms of ecological health, edge is considered, right? It's the buffer, right? It's what sort of protects you from this developed infrastructure all around it. Pioneer Park has a lot of edge. And when, you know, depending on exactly how you define that, there's very little sort of in the middle that is considered non-edge habitat and is actually sort of prime habitat. And so, you know, I mean, there could be an argument that sort of the more you chip away and push that edge in, you're actually impacting the interior of the park even more. So that would be a non-answer to your question, Hillary, but but maybe salient. So
I was just trying to think in terms of jurisdiction, what would, and finances, what would be any other kind of creative perspectives to approach the issue from?
I mean, it's worth the discussion, definitely. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, it looks like Sam's going to pop on. There he is.
Just wanted to point out the possibility of utilities in that right of way underground and potentially erecting any permanent structures, or if there was future, I don't think there is, but if there was any future storm capital projects for that edge of right of way there.
Yeah. One thing I was thinking about was that, you know, we've, and this harkens back to our conversation about fire infrastructure, you know, we could be talking about an increased frequency of, you know, fire hydrants. I'm not really saying that. I'm just, you know, it's to Sam's point, right? There's utilities in the right of way. And that's my larger point about not constructing within that zone any sort of a permanent structure, because there's always a possibility that it could get damaged, removed. So
Yes, Marie, you had another comment?
Yeah, you know, well, I guess my first comment would be is I wouldn't be too worried about future infrastructure impacting a fence. It's not really a significant construction project. But you know what, I'm also kind of wondering, I don't know whether the community parks off street because they see everybody else doing it or because they have a real sense that that's what they need to do. I mean, I am concerned if what we have to do to change it is to change the master plan. And the last thing I want to do is ask the city attorney and everybody else to spend time on this, which would also delay getting it done anyway. I mean, is there a way to like put up temporary sawhorses or something and just tell people to park on the street and see what community reaction is? What do you think, Elaine? Or Sam?
I don't think there's a reason we couldn't do that, right? It could be an interesting pilot program to see how comfortable people feel parking along the street.
I mean, because if we could change people's behavior without having to do anything, that would be great. I mean, there's really no reason not to park on the street. The only reason I don't park on the street is because nobody else does. And that's what we got used to doing. And I just wonder how many other people are the same way.
So, Marie, what are you thinking, that you would just like put some signs up or put up a temporary barrier, even like just a tape or something, but with enough signage to tell people that it's okay to fully park on the street? And then maybe hope that the grass grows in, and then by then the behaviors are changed?
Yeah, I mean, why couldn't we just put sawhorses up with a sign on them? I would assume the city has something like that. And if it actually worked, then yeah, the next step probably would be some way to redevelop that gravel in a way that made it clear you can't park there.
Yeah. Were you thinking that maybe you would ask the city to stripe it for parking spaces, like with the little brackets like they have in town center? And that would make it really clear.
Yeah, that would be a good idea, along with some temporary signage that says, here, you don't park here, park on the street, please.
I can certainly talk to the transportation engineer about the possibility of that type of a pavement marking and how she would see that given sort of the larger picture of the sharrows. There is an odd line on the west side that's not really clear what it's demarking, so we could talk about that, but I'd be happy to have that conversation with her.
Yeah, that sounds like an interesting proposal. So if you could pursue that and report back, that would give us something to work with. In the meantime, I was unaware of the inclusion of specific parking areas within the Pioneer Park Master Plan, so I should review that. I don't think it would, I wouldn't want to change something that has been written into the park's plan without serious consideration. So a starting place would be for me to review that document and present my findings to this group.
So if we were to park on the street, that's really not part of the Pioneer Park Master Plan. So the approach of encouraging to park on the street, am I correct, Elaine, that doesn't impact the master plan at all?
It does not.
So I don't know how other people feel about this, but I would, rather than wait until September, if the city traffic people thought it was a good idea to just put up a temporary signage and stripe, my encouragement would be to go ahead and do that. If it works, that's great. If it doesn't work, then in September, we have something else to talk about.
I think it might be, so I think the south end parking spot is a little bit trickier in terms of excluding people from parking there and then not forcing them onto the pavement where there's not a sign right away that says, well, and also don't park south of here. I'd be more inclined in terms of a little bit of a test program to maybe try this on the center pullout.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe some of those areas that are really heavily impacted by people just pulling off the road, and maybe just trying it there and seeing, and maybe some of you could run by and I can run by, park staff could note, are people still parking there? I think maybe what some of my concern is that people would see the sawhorses, which in our case are, they're traffic barricades that are orange and white, right? And they might think, I can't park at all along here, right? Which is not the message that we want to convey. But we could think creatively about how to delineate that area, make it clear that it's not for parking up on the edge, but you can park along the road. And also leave the trailhead open.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I would agree. That's a good idea. Let's try that in the center area and see what happens.
Oh, yeah, I support that. Sounds like we have general consensus behind that idea.
That's the word I was looking for.
At the same time, if there were paint stripes to show where it was not legal to park in front of that fire plug, that might give a hint as to what the changes were about. Yeah, I see a lot of cars parked in places that are not technically legal near that center.
Connection, or is it Thomas's?
What's that?
Oh, there was a connection hiccup and I didn't know if it was on my end or if it was on yours, but you kind of froze up for me. But I got it actually saw the transcript, so we're fine.
Okay. All right. Unless there's any further comments on that topic, I think we can move on to the cross plan update.
So just to summarize before we move on, so your direction to city staff would be to erect some sort of structures along that center graveled area to encourage people to park solely on the street in the center of the block. And then
Yes.
report back at the September meeting on the effectiveness.
Yes. And I guess we can have an indication later from city staff whether it would be feasible to do some sort of striping for the to show where parking was encouraged.
Yeah, and I can look into that between now and the September meeting also. So Deb, is that an adequate move forward?
I would refer to that as the board's consensus on that item, and whether, we can talk offline about how you go about accomplishing that. I do want to circle back, and I apologize to the board. I'm putting my clerk hat on here, but I noticed on your agenda that this item was looking for a recommendation for the Open Space Trust to approve the Pioneer Park and Ingstrom Open Space 2020 Trails Work Plan. So if there is, if you are in agreement, or if you want to make some changes to that, we would prefer to have a motion.
Oh yes, I'm sorry, I moved past that before we concluded that topic. So at this point, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the Trails Work Plan as it was presented.
I'd move that.
I'll second it.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Deb.
Okay, and now moving on to the cross plan update. Would that be you again, Elaine?
Just keeps being me. Yes, you guys have to keep listening to me talk. This is, I'll be happy. The torch will start to be passed, and you'll hear more from Lizzie and Sam at the next meeting. So I just wanted to give just a brief update on the pros plan progress, because I know there is interest from the trust board and involvement. So it is still in development. We're still working with the consultant, Conservation Technics, on this work, and they have been, the Parks and Rec Commission has been working hard on this also. Recently, they reviewed questions that are going to go out in the second community survey for the pros plan. We do expect that community survey to go out in mid-August, just so you know. In terms of next steps, I think we're looking at a discussion with the trust board on this, either at a special meeting in October, possibly, or at our regularly scheduled meeting in November. And there's a possibility, though we're not quite at the level of commitment quite yet, to that being a joint meeting with the Parks and Rec Commission. So what we'd look for at that meeting is presenting the results of the second community survey, hearing what people had to say, and then discussing with the trust board some of the elements that are being drafted in the plan that really pertain to natural areas and open spaces, which could include a lot of different things. But some things that really come to mind are things like policies that govern land acquisition for the city for, new open spaces or natural areas, the preservation of that land and existing open space land. And then one of the things that I know there's some interest in discussing is around funding. So where does the funding come from to, for stewardship of that land and really making sure that it's in good health, but also what level of funding is right. So really figuring out how to right size the budget around this type of work. So that's just a little bit of a heads up about what kind of topics could come up during that discussion. So you'll hear more about it as we nail down the schedule for the fall. And I will stay in touch with you all about if we have a special meeting in October. I will try and get that on your calendars as early as possible, or let you know that we're just going to go ahead and do it at the November meeting. In terms of the timeline, just so you know, right now we're looking at possibly bringing this to City Council for adoption either by the end of this year or early next year. So the timeline has changed, a lot, obviously, with COVID, but then just bringing a lot of programs back online, the recreation reset that's happening right now, and there's just a lot of moving pieces within public works. So we're still trying to wait for everything to settle a little bit and keep this thing moving forward as much as possible. But the city is very interested in the trust board's input and creating a forum for that. And that's it from me on the pros plan update.
Yes, Marie.
Just one comment. My understanding is that the Parks and Rec Commission has kind of divvied up various parts of the pros plan. So I guess, I don't necessarily see a need for us to have a total joint meeting, but I would certainly like the members of the Parks and Rec Commission who have been looking at portions of the proposal that impact natural resources and policies associated with that. I would really encourage them to join us.
Okay, no, that's good feedback. Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion or comments on the cross plan update? Okay, then I think we can move on to Quadrant Reports. So let's start with the southeast quadrant.
I think that's part of mine.
Yeah.
So it's not, I don't have any major comments. I've actually kind of walked in all three of them recently. And I don't, other than the things that we found last time I was out with Hillary and Elaine, everything looks good. In fact, I really want to say I've noticed that the trails, particularly in the Northwest, are looking really good. It's clear that they've been pruned and tidied, and thank you. That's very, especially, I spend most of my time on the interior trails because I like to walk my dog off leash, and that seems to be the best way to interact with people. So having those inside trails in good shape is really a plus. So thank you.
And then for the northeast quadrant, I think that's you, Carol, and I have that assignment currently. Did you have your mute on?
I said, I've noticed there's tremendous improvement since, January and February. But, I can get through the trails now. It's really quite good. However, I was there with my 5-year-old grandson, and there are places where, the gravel is kind of slippery. There's a couple of places in there where I was tripping over roots. And so I think there's some extra, work that needs to be done. I mean, a number of the projects are obvious. There's entire areas that have fencing around them, and there's red banners on trees. So I understand there's a lot of work that's in progress. So I'm glad to see that. But I do there is erosion going on, and I think there is a need. And what concerns me is the day we were out there, we encountered a number of different groups of elderly people. And when we were slipping on the gravel, I was very concerned about whether that's an issue for some of those folks. Now I understand it's probably the more challenging quadrant for folks to hike in, and it's kind of nice to have something that's a little more challenging. So at this point I have mixed feelings. I certainly believe that there's a lot of progress going on in clearing the paths and trying to clear the damage. But I also see that there's more work that we need to do.
Yes, from my point of view, that area where the Ravine Trail goes down from the crest, that's in the trail maintenance plan, that's an area that definitely needs attention. And
Yeah.
also there are stair steps going up the other side from the Ravine Trail where there's some erosion on the outside where dogs or people on bikes have gone outside of the cribbing that was put in place for the stairs. And that's just an area of concern. The trails maintenance crew should keep an eye on that. And if the erosion gets bad, perhaps we need additional curbing there to prevent that all from going down slope. Okay, I think that's it for the Northeast quad. And so can we hear from the Northwest quad?
I think the trails are in terrific condition. I was a little concerned about the hazelnut pruning the first time I walked in there and saw a lot of it was down. And then, so thanks for Andy for clarifying it was him and not some rogue pruners, because the rest of it, they really did a really nice job clearing things out. And there's no slippage problems at all. I have a woman who I've met who is wheelchair bound at Starbucks, and she uses that the trail, the perimeter trail along 84th to scoot all the way through. And she says she has no problems whatsoever. So it's really a compliment to the accessibility that Andy and his crew have provided to make that possible. And it just did a fantastic job opening that up for everyone to use.
And I would agree with Craig about the Northwest quadrant. I sent a couple photos in when I'm out, emailed photos to Elaine, and I think she's been able to work with some information. There's one tree in particular that has a face. If you approach it from the south, it looks like Homer Simpson. It's over by the Don bench. And it's interesting, I noticed earlier this week that the whole, it was like a double tree, and the whole north half of the tree has fallen away. But other than that, everything's looking great.
Elaine, can I chime in and ask for a follow-up on that large big leaf maple that had fallen in the interior of the northwestern quadrant that you and Marie and I saw when we were out there a couple weeks ago with your daughter?
Sure. I know that the very next day we had some members of our crew, I think it was the next day, members of our crew out there clearing it. And so I believe that the first time they went out, and Sam can probably speak to this in more detail than I can, but they went out and they bucked it up. Originally, I think they had it in piles. I'm hoping we talked about spreading it out and putting it in ground contact around that area so that we could get a little bit faster decomposition, but I'm not sure what the status is on that. So they did roll those very large trunk pieces off of the trail, I know. So it sounded like they had fun doing it.
Thanks to everyone for your work on that. That was a really large large stem of that tree that came down. So thank you for all the labor that went into that.
Yeah, it was a pretty amazing fall. A sad loss, of course, but it's always amazing to see that much biomass on the ground. So.
All right, I think that concludes the Quadrant Reports. Our next meeting is scheduled for September, and we'll see you all there. Do I get a motion to adjourn?
Can I say one thing right before you adjourn, Tom? I just want to make a special note, if you haven't already received a note about this, that normally these meetings fall on the third Thursday of the month. And we have moved back to the 23rd for the next meeting in order to accommodate, I believe it's Rosh Hashanah. And so we want to make sure that you all have that on your calendar. I believe that Deb has sent out the new Zoom
Revised meeting date,
for
yes.
that one. So just thought it was worth a special note.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Carol.
The mute button on. Will the next meeting be by Zoom, or do you think that it'll be in person? And
I
you may
think
have
we're-
an answer to that, Tom.
I think we're on Zoom up until the end of the year.
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay.
All right. Once again, I'll call for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Just
Thank you. All in
One
favor?
second while my mic's off.
Yeah.
Got that.
Hi.
I just
Okay.
want to keep meeting.
Okay. All in favor.
Aye.
Bye.
Aye.
See you all next time. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you guys.
Bye.